Derrida started with a preface, talking about the importance of a preface to how do you go about, when reading a book, get to the body if you don't have a preface, or you don't have a history of reading, and that points back to voice and sound and intonation, and that points back to the history of the lexicon itself. It points back to language. And so I wanted to talk about the preface because I'm not certain really where to start. I'm just kind of starting and want to preface almost the body of what it is this video is about by speaking about the canon of history, the accepted inclusion into language itself. We speak with one another lingually, symbolically, phonically, and this kind of requires us to look at prelingual, being prelingual, and observing prelingual humans becoming lingual, and then noting where we are lingually, meaning a lot of people's memories are tied to language, and so a lot of people's initial memories are found when they first begin speaking, and not often prior to that, but a phenomenologist, somebody starting from a root of phenomena, would say that the child is experiencing a phenomena in which distinctions become made aware for that child. And this makes me think of the inherited canon, the trifecta within philosophy of epistemology, ontology, and phenomenology as base root from which to start discourse, in which to start engaging with the language, with other people, with history, with the universe, with the self, with an internalized self, the notion of the body within the body, mirroring its way outward. And yeah, it's really weird. I circled back to wanting to examine these things because I was caught up in policing words, more specifically in debate with antinatalists about the word imposing and imposition, and thinking about aspects and language use. And I got to the point of parsing off all the diction uses, accepted uses of the word imposition, and challenging an antinatalist to find a definition within a standard dictionary for imposition such that it applied to concepts of like self-imposing. I'm imposing coffee upon myself, but I'm not suffering a burden, but I'm suffering an experience, or maybe I'm not suffering it, but I'm experiencing the sensation of coffee. But I was challenging the antinatalist to find a definition of imposition that was not already where one had to be already in, quote-unquote, the game of life, the experience of life, the lingually capable individuals engaging with one another, as opposed to the notion that a parent imposes a child or imposes upon a child by mere fact of having the child. Because the antinatalist wanted to look at the act of imposing based on procreation, being in utero, and looking at the idea that you're creating a human within a setting, within an environment, and that one becomes aware of that environment, and the imposition is the fact that the parents are part of the causal chain for creating a incarnate human that intrinsically is going to suffer. And I thought of autoimmune diseases, I thought of impacted wisdom teeth, ingrown toenails, things that the body, if it can exist in its environment, it will experience pain, as opposed to having an outside source experiencing pain. And so basically I was arguing that imposition is implying that one first be existing, lingually or prelingually, prior to having an imposition on them, and that the act of coming into existence is not found in dictionary definition of imposition. And then, so I challenged this through interaction with Rignolo, and we broke down, that the antinatalist wants to overreach the definition. I said they're overreaching the etymology and the history of the word imposition in order to incorporate or use it to point back to the creation of an individual. So I challenged them, find a dictionary definition of this. Rignolo came back with a dictionary definition that said, to establish or create something unwanted, either forcibly or harmfully. And he said that itself was a dictionary definition that could apply to how the antinatalist was using the term. My big lesson in this was to discover that I myself have a tendency to police grammar and police usage, as opposed to finding special cases of use and accepting those. And so I grant, okay, there's a special case of imposition in which the antinatalists are applying meaning to the parent, from the parent to the child. And I realized that I wanted to find out how they're using their grammar and definition in order to make meaning, to order to allow the use, so to speak, within the accepted canons of dictionary definition. Anyway, I'm trying to speak about, imposition always seems as if there's an object or a thing, a noun, that is imposing from one sentient to another sentient. And generally we speak from the self. We're speaking about humans in most cases. Anyway, that being said, I really wanted to parse off that we have to be in the game before imposition occurs, but the coming into the game is not an imposition. But then allowing the special use, allowing that dictionary definition to apply, but then I realized something unwanted is different than someone unwanted. And then I thought, forcible or harmful, well, is going through the process of growth and changing and reproduction from a woman's body into giving birth. Is that, although I call that a creation and think that that's acceptable to use the word creation there, that it was not done so forcibly, that the whole process is not done by force, but done by just being a part of the causal chain, and that it was not harmful, meaning there was no intent from the parent to harm the child. The child is not harmed by coming out of the womb, meaning that it's not an infliction upon the child which would make the child abnormally, perpetually in a damaged position by nature of it having an environment that allows it to come into a condition, having an environment that allows the child to be born in the first place or at all. So I wanted to make a distinction based on use and say, well, the antinatalist wants this special use, and who am I any longer to say that they should not have it? But I did look at the definition, once again, to establish or create something unwanted, forcibly or harmfully, that Rignolo was using, and thinking, not only is it generally a thing, a noun is a person, place, or thing. So when we say a thing, is that dictionary definition pointing to a sentient or a someone? And I say, no, it says something. This is on the Webster's Dictionary of the word imposing, by the way. So feel free to look that up. Maybe I'll link that in the bottom of the video. Anyway, this whole thing had me thinking about my relationship to grammar, policing grammar, diction, how I parse off what is correct grammar and what is not correct grammar, what is accepted and then what is historic or etymological. This then had me thinking about logic and the trifecta of ontology, epistemology, and phenomenology, having an overlay partially upon each other, and so that this space among this trifecta is the root of, I guess, the philosophical canon, to say that all things that we can speak about or start with a foundation are going to stem from one of these three categories. Now, that's kind of the preface. The body of the video is more or less thinking about the a priori notion that mind and all that comes with the orderliness of a grammar, of our intersections with lingual possibility, can be reduced to the epistemologist as being the foundation from which all thoughts stem. And they can always re-reduce, that my knowledge, the gnosis of all phenomena or all notions of an external world can firstly be reduced back to mind, that you cannot doubt what it is that you're thinking. And so you accept thinking, you accept doubt, and both of these become foundational to the epistemologist that's looking at the language's relationship to laws of logic, laws of reason. That had me then thinking of this is defensible because they look at their hand and they sense their hand, kind of like Wittgenstein's Uncertainty, his book about, a treatise about what it is to know a hand before he gets into the philosophical investigations. See, I look at the former Wittgenstein as an epistemologist who then moves into, kind of feathers into briefly becoming an ontologist and then trying to refold that back into descriptions of language in general. And so I thought about a phenomenologist is starting from all phenomena and saying that the phenomena itself, it's not a acceptance of what is in one's relationship to the hand. So the epistemologist has a belief in the hand, an experience of the hand, and this is a priori. And so they talk about the gnosis, the relationship of their interaction with the hand. What does it mean to have a hand and realize you are incapable of doubting that you have a hand? And then extrapolating a interior of self and an exterior of self. Now, I suppose that's a supplemental preface, because I wanted to talk about the idea of the epistemologist, the logician, the logical positivist, always reducing the external world back to the notion of you cannot doubt the mind, but you do parse off doubt from knowledge, and that parsing, using reasonability, using already a process of language that a child, they want to say the child, when they speak, they innately have that, but I think they still, a child is relating to, firstly, their senses and their physiological, like binocular vision relative to their senses, to get an idea of distance and get an idea of change and tempo and time and rhyming and so forth, in order to make distinctions and categorizations at all. And that this is an evolution from Babel into a lingual awareness, and then a reduction, then into logic, then into reductionistic logic that leads back to the mind and then echoes back out to the hand. So how to put this? I think that a history of convention is important to note here, that the biblical idea of Adam and Eve being nude and then finding knowledge, and immediately they find a shame in their nudity. Maybe it's not a shame proper, but they find a guilt or a reason for clothes, and that we reiterate clothing upon children prelingually, and we carry this convention generally, unless we find, a perversion, nude parties, sex parties, absences of clothes, but the clothes themselves are a reiterative notion of the notion that the mind and the environment of the mind, or the body, the brain, is reiterated as being separate from its environment. And that this reiteration, in a way, is to say that the history of wearing clothes reiterates a justification for the epistemologist, if starting from that foundation, to firstly accept the mind as opposed to the senses, where the ontologist is going to accept all senses as what is, the isness of the being first, and then look at the relationship to language and the relationship of how it is we describe inwardness, outwardlessness, and so the ontologist, when we think about the Venn diagram, this trifecta, the ontologist starts from what is, the epistemologist starts from the knowledge and negation of distinctions, any distinctions, and uses that as their a priori base from which to fling forward. The phenomenologist is not denying the senses, is not denying the epistemology. Their engagement with these two other pieces of the Venn diagram is one of looking at how it is that the mind works. All three of these lead into investigations of what it is to think, what it is to be, what it is to be subject, what it is to be object. But the phenomenologist, as far as I can take, now granted, I'm always stepping outside of the canon, meaning I have my history of philosophers, and I have my history of other books read and other interactions with other media to take from, to cherry pick from. And some of them, but the phenomenologist looks not at the history of their interaction with all media as being cherry-picked, but noting that some things come to mind, some things are subconscious to the mind, if you will. They're a background, the distinction of forwardness, of backwardness, but a full engagement in all phenomena. Speaking of language and one's interaction with the language, or a community in discourse, dialectics in general, the phenomenologist is looking at all aspects of language and all aspects of senses in any symbolic, I want to say a symbolic form or formality. The artist, a non-representational artist who is, I shouldn't say non-representational, but not referring to direct empiricism for their ideas, seems as if they're always representing symbolically or subconsciously a phenomena that is non-referential. The symbols are non-empirical. I shouldn't say non-empirical, but what I mean to say is the act of labeling, the act of one's engagement with the world, their universe at large, can be re-systematized or found to be having its foundations from phenomenology. So the idea that one might say there is the phenomena of a rain cloud, and noting that they have an awareness of histories of Indians dancing to bring about rain, or one's engagement to the cosmos at large, and saying this aspect, this rain, in my mind is giving me a flurry of meaning, but I can reduce it as a phenomenologist to a symbol, or to its history, or to a meaning with its history, or to the meaning that comes to the mind as I am monolinguistic. Now, if I'm polylinguistic, then there's another avenue. There's multiple avenues that you get to use with it. But looking at us being human, engaging with language, that the four how to put this, the derailment of epistemological foundations seems to be a premise from where the phenomenologist would come, from where they would come, because it would be more of a subjectivism, one's relationship to the symbols or the meaning or the sensation that comes concurrently with one's engagement with the language, one's engagement with what we say something is. It's peculiar, but I wanted to speak more from the idea of the phenomenologist. Now, get me wrong here. Don't get me wrong here. I'm speaking from the hip. My my knowledge of the canon of phenomenology in terms of its philosophical history, the adherence to an idea of phenomenology, I may be off base. My foot is not on the base particularly, and this has to do with a history of contrarianism, of negating the next truth, the next basis, the next foundation. This comes from kind of the idea of Derrida of deconstruction, in that you could look at life and say, and death, and say, is life a part of death more primarily than death being a part of life? And Derrida breaks this down and says life is a type of death, and that he's founding everything on that idea. And yet we can say that death, and that would be a phenomenological view, in my point, a foundation, to reduce to that level, where the epistemologist would reduce and say death is only known to the living, the lingual. Death is only a part of life. And so there's this kind of contrarian dualism that needs to be accepted and then rejected and then re-accepted again on reapproach. The idea of clothing being a reiterative pattern to epistemology, so that by wearing clothes we remain fixated within paradigms. The and the internalized echo of wearing clothes would be kind of like in Chinese martial arts. You have your body, and then you have an internal body. The epistemologist reduces back to the mind to point to the mind, but they're looking at the mind as source of world as opposed to an antenna of the world. Now, this how to put this? How to do it? Where am I going? How am I getting there? The eliminative materialist versus Panpsychism, as Matt Thou Art That has been bringing up, this duality, or this roads splitting, where one, in the eliminative materialist camp, one's external world of objects and of happenings takes on a metaphysical naturalist kind of approach, as to say there is no inherent soul of the fire or heart of the cosmos. There is no externalized being. Where this road, and I'm glad he brought up this distinction between the eliminative materialist and panpsychist, because I think from the epistemological frame, if one is kind of falling into logical positive camps, they reduce to solipsism and arguments of solipsism, and then arguments of nihilism seem to stem from that. In some instances, that process seems to be occurring if you're already adhering or aligning your paradigm to an epistemological ground. And so, I guess where I want to drive is the panpsychist is, at least from Matt's point of view, will talk about the soul of the fire, the soul of the cosmos, of the universe, where you take an ontologist like Professor Anton, and he won't say that there is an intelligence proper that is intrinsic to the objects of the universe. He will say that there's an orderliness to the universe. Now, most atheistic approaches, and I have a history of criticizing Anton because I believe that he is so within the canon of philosophy, if you will. He's taken an ivory tower approach, presents himself that way. He wants people to respond to him that way, and demeans other people as being ignorant if they don't adhere to that. But or if they don't praise him as being more fluent, which he is more fluent than I am, but it doesn't mean that his consideration is shared by me in the same manner, or nor the conclusions. So hopefully, if he does change his mind, and I'm not saying from an ontologist vantage point, but to a panpsychist vantage point, that this does not obliterate his condition to maintain a position as professor. That being said, what I'm driving at is the idea of one's relationship to their presence, to their nowness, can stem from the skin outward, or it can stem from the internal self, internalizing all experience and all coinciding, overlapping superimpositions of a symbol that is meaningful for X object. The train means. A train's whistle means I need to be more spiritual, to me. A small child is meaningful to me in its suggestive that I stop a certain process of ignoring science. It's really weird that I say these things. These seem absolutely apart from one another, but I've noticed a superimposition as opposed to a imposition of coincidental happenings that seem as if I must be stemming from my relationship to all phenomena, lingually, symbolically, logically, sensibly, empirically, demonstrably, what one might say actually, but with kind of like where one moves through phases of accepting the world in a natural, conventional, historic, relational to a justice system, and then what it means to be insane, to lose one's relationship to these customs and these conventions. But not just to lose that, but to gain an aspect of finding a meaningful relationship to the phenomena that's happening around you. I'm not certain where to go with this, but I want to say that I veer towards the Panpsychism in through my experience, a intelligence that is not dissimilar to a matrix, or the idea of the matrix creator being a god, but nor the archetypes, inherited archetypes of deities and gods and goddesses and animalia. I just jumped off my path there. That I favor based on experience of what I want to call phenomena that erased the subjective objective dichotomy or barrier, and that which is out of me is also all that is within me. This brings me back to aspect blindness. The idea that the totality of our being are all of the historic, all of the concurrent, all aspects of our history and our concurrence with our present environment are where's it going to go there? All histories, concurrent environments, all aspects define who we are. And it's only somebody focusing the definition of saying that it's an aspect instead of it is a definition of self, a definition of other. That this person here is a collection of all of their historic aspects of their life, including all imaginative aspects. This idea it was to say that being who forgets, loses memory about some of the aspects of their being could be looked at as being a whole different person. We can round them off at this time, then they lose a memory, and we round them off at this time. So they've lost an aspect of their being. And they are a different individual. But we don't give them a different name. So we don't say the identity's changed. And then this gives us a notion of tempo, time, dynamics within change. So we are all changing. There is a evolution. There is a consistent historic from back then, from past to present, into what we become. Anyway, I wanted to flip-flop that we have a standard convention, especially an epistemologist. But I shouldn't say that, except for what we call reasonability, accepted reasonability, would be to not identify the self as a different person because aspects of that person change. By definition, the aspect is but a part of the being and not a definition of the being. So then this would bring up the idea of, well, let's change the word aspect or look at how the totality of aspects become the identity of the individual or one's engagement, confluence with their own, all symbols, all meanings, all histories, all everything at a presence. Because we talk about the capacity. Well, this person's capacity to remain consistent in dialogue will lead them to even using words like identity and aspect as being one's within another, as opposed to one defines oneself as an aspect. The phenomenologist would not make an aspect of existence distinguishable from the identity of one's existence. I say existence instead of one's person because I want to include the entire cosmos within that. Aspect blindness, it seems as if we move from phases. Now, how to put this? The index being the placeholder is something that we do. The index is like the ontologist. The icon is like the epistemologist, and the symbol is like the phenomenologist, in that where does one's root start? Now, I brought up art before, talking about non-representational art, or representation strictly from one's imagination, or being at hand, letting the hand create whatever it's going to create. Almost, it's to move through a phase, such as, at one time I draw and I see the line in front of the pencil, and so I'm essentially just tracing a line that seems to be there, kind of like Michelangelo saying he saw the David within the stone and it was his job to release David. Then there's an intentional image where there's no line prior to the pencil. It's just the pencil and my then engagement with the artwork. I move through phases of relationships with non-representational art. Then I step back and I look at the images and all of the images and how they're coherent or non-coherence, how their non-coherence to reality brings out aspects of reality that are then by the eye brought together as focal points or as a meaning to the whole image, the whole painting, parsed off by the border, by the frame. I guess what I'm getting at is kind of like watching Logic rolls the dice. He is irritating because he is falling through René Descartes, falling through the idea of saying that one should not start from phenomena in life like Antikaantavad and using that as a ground. So they are irritated. Gary, Logic rolls the dice, other anti-natalists are irritated at what I want to say is a phenomenological vantage point that Antikaantavad is taking on or sprouting forth from. This is not a depreciation of logic by any means, but it is to point to where people are stemming. From where are they stemming of this trifecta? This rephase, phases growth, if you will, or supposed growth of indulging and inflating one's knowledge set based on experience, but one's gnosis, history, books, more specifically, or engagement with media at large. This yeah, kind of an idea of diminishment. Oh my God, I've been going off for an hour. What have I said? That had a video, a couple videos on this eliminative of materialism versus panpsychism. Somebody asked in his question answer about, how can these come together or be both? And all I could think of were changes in consideration that are phase changes. And that an allowance at this time can be an aspect of one's being, and then accepting one's history of a time when the environment is inert. Kind of like Anton will see, logic of prime numbers or mathematics as indicative, representational of an orderliness within the cosmos, but he doesn't want to say that that is an external, greater than, other dimensional, higher dimensional panpsychism, an intelligence that scans down. But at one time he may have gone through a phase where he accepted that. So the inclusion of multiple overlays of contradictions accepted internally as one accepts their life, not historically, but ahistorically. And by ahistoric, I mean cut apart from any notion of evolution and just accepting everything in terms of immediate presence. Kind of like a flat painting is not a 3D movie, and a 3D movie is not real space. But all of this, all of those distinctions can be conglomerated, whether or not it's almost an erasure of distinction. learn to forget. So, God, I really wanted to go somewhere because I'm trying to tie this back into, my policing the antinatalist grammar. I have phased out of the policing, then re-engaged it, and there's an ebb and flow to my history of phasing, my history of stemming from different grounds, a history of my education, even being able to use, accepted historically canonized words in logical debate, such that somebody that has experienced a history of that canon, notably regularly, they're into it, that's what they're into, would not just see me as word salad proper. But I'm not really worried about my ego. This idea of thinking from the gut, from the lung, from the viscera, mind retaking it, instead of being the source of the intelligence, it's an antenna of an intelligence that is orderly throughout us, throughout the cosmos. This potentiality of our being points to, in my mind, the more we point inward into the viscera, the more we focus on the internal body, the more we collapse all contradictions and all differences of phase groups, and we accept them and deny them, but accept them, bring them close. We bring them into a presence, but we also bring them into care. We care about ourselves. We care about our environment. Meaning that care is a word. Not all people care in different ways, but it's kind of like the care-centrific way about what it is to be a civilized person having a civilized discussion on YouTube. To listen to something and sense that you agree with it, or sense that it's agitation and that you don't agree with it, and then to accept everything that you've brought and internalize it, and then find meaning from it, and then find cosmic meaning in it, to find intelligence outward. To me, the panpsychist, to me, the theist, the polytheist, anyone that has not a historically religious dogmatic approach of religion, but not denying that, or not denying that, and not denying that, denies that, and it's almost like a surface level tension on oneself that is reiterated right down to the custom of wearing clothes, of parsing ourselves in the environment, not for temperature reasons, not for survival reasons, but strictly for knowledge, or shame and guilt and impropriety and definitions of individualism, as opposed to egalitarianism, cosmopolitanism. This has me thinking that it kind of like when you're on your deathbed, you might get a vision of the totality of all aspects of your life flattening into one thing that is the temporal end of your sentient being, defining yourself to yourself. But I don't want to segment off the living's relationship to the cosmos at large and say one can see, this is the clincher, but I've already set precedents for this, which is one can know intelligence in the cosmos, as the cosmos, and being not only a part, an aspect of, a player of, but the source of. One can move amongst the trifecta, philosophical trifecta, and rephase, re-agree with all historic positions, then deny these two, deny that one, accept this one. Logic rolls a dice. He's a young man, very intelligent man. He will reduce everything back to a priori gnosis, operators of knowledge. The ontologist wants to look at the senses first, an acceptance of the senses, and then they take on a metaphysical normative. Then the phenomenologist is engaged in all symbols, all histories, meaning as opposed to the gnosis, how one accepts all phenomena, and then how one uses the epistemology to describe it, and then uses an empiricism to bounce off of the ontology. So we're all waxing over this trifecta. How do we accept it all? And then what does it mean to step outside the canon and negate the trifecta? Meaning develop a different history of dialogue, or a casual vernacular that just kind of describes what it is we think and how it is we feel about how the universe is put together. It's kind of like in this painting, this is supposed to be a Venn diagram. This is supposed to be a Venn diagram. This is a Venn diagram. But they're all made into 3D images, and implying that they're all tied to the psyche, to the mind of this clown. I put an eye floating above a man, and like an objective outside eye, to appreciate an acceptance of theism. This does not delude my alliance with atheism. I say alliance in that I understand that phase. I'm not certain what else to say on it, other than the idea of creating a dialectic to merge these phases of consideration. We want to say this philosopher did this and outline them, separate them off from them, but their considerations were antithetical to ideas that one accepts. This brings me to a notion, kind of what I have adhered to, is the idea that everything is real. And by everything being real, I take that from a phenomenological standpoint. So when I hear the train go by, if it means something to me symbolically, meaning a symbol or an idea comes to mind, it is not based on anything logical, it's not based on anything empirical, it's an internalization of the external world. An internalization and a geometric alignment with multiple happenings as symbol and as symbolic cause. One might accuse me, theism or the panpsychist, as interpreting an intelligence in the world. One is interpreting an intelligence in the world, but my experience with an orb, a big red star, a complete possession and takeover, a complete relationship to one's thought process, one's symbols coming from the outside, relationships to shape, color, temperature, organs internally, what's beating, what's feeling, how am I feeling it, allowed a direction and intelligence to possess me, move me, drive me. That is my personal evidence of an external intelligence that is also not external. It's throughout, so it's internal, it's external. Like I said, the dichotomy between external and internal seems to be reiterated as being most important, that we make these distinctions in order to come to solipsism or nihilism or empiricism. Amendum once, I was trying to get him, break your mind. The Army's idea is to break your mind. I was trying to get him, he said, to this idea, and he said, what do you want me to do, bang my head against a wall? And I said, yes. And then a friend of mine was talking about suicide, and he said, well, if you're going to kill yourself, I want you to cut one of your fingers off first. And immediately they're like, oh, that's insane, don't do that. And the idea behind that was to take something that we accept at hand, so close to us, different from a face or a defacement, seeing the tip of one's nose or sensing the hand, but to separate one's body, whatever one's limitation of the idea of individualism, separate yourself off of something that you identify as part of yourself, that you adhere to. Get rid of it. This reminds me of William S. Burroughs killing his wife, cutting off a finger, watching his son grow into a drug addict and die of the abuse, and relating books of his phenomena. I would say William S. Burroughs is a phenomenologist. So how do I phase in to discussion and phase out of discussion? How do I bring importance in to the act of the discourse itself, not accepting another's position, but not denying it, trying to robustly outline it, massage it, then enter it, accept it here as phase, accept it here as not. I'm just thinking of my own history of evolution from Wittgenstein and through Wittgenstein, reading with Wittgenstein. The world is composed of facts, not things. That brings me back to imposition. Some thing, forcible or harmful, not someone. Like when we talk of the self, you talk a zombie picture show. He's a Wittgensteinian in that he believes in facts, not things. So in a way, he's more of an epistemologist overlaid with a phenomenologist, but defaults back to the gnosis. I've been off of YouTube for so long now, and I have all these other things going on in my life, but I wanted to re-believe in my dialectical intercourse with other people. Even if the comments, or even if my faith in the viewership of what it is I do is one where I think there will only be disconnect. The thing about Matt's lecture is none of the questions afterward were, as far as I could tell, indulgences in what he was saying, other than the gentleman that brought up the kind of the Parthenon of archetypes, and how these archetypes for external intelligences could play a role in a panpsychist. An argument for the panpsychist environment. Anyway, I guess this is a little bit kind of just a video for Matt, but not for Matt, but I want Matt to see it. I want Eric Orwell to see it. And that's another thing. I mean, Eric Orwell is just doing a video saying God is real, doing his justifications. Hero reductionism to Planck distance, then into meaning, one's engagement with one's environment, ultimately comes to an idea of acceptance of dogmas, as a truth, as a pure truth that he's finding through Christianity. So I don't adhere to that, but I don't deny that, and in the non-denial I have a history of adherence to that as well. Know oneself, learn to forget, separate yourself off from yourself, practice going out in public without clothes. That's the theme. Anyway, what am I doing, an hour and 5? Okay, whoever's going to sit through this, I appreciate it.